Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a really fun talk for me. So I'm going to talk about what it means to be a startup. So a lot of you who have joined us recently from elsewhere, especially those of you who are interns from different parts of the country or the world, you've heard a lot about what it means to be a Silicon Valley startup. Well, you've heard the word a lot, but you're not entirely sure what it means to be a startup, and what does it mean in particular in the context of being a tech company in Silicon Valley. So I'm going to talk about what that means at a very high level today, especially in relation to what we're doing here at Idibon. So I think my favorite quote about companies that applies in particular to startups here in the Bay, that starting a company is like throwing yourself off the cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. So you have a limited amount of time to do something successful. You're pretty sure you have all the components pieces with you. You're just not sure yet how they fit together, and you're trying to figure that out in order to hit flight before you hit the bottom. So this was Reid Hoffman, one of LinkedIn's co-founders. So we'll talk about three things today. So types of startups, obviously consumer, enterprise, hardware, software, what do those differences look like? Funding startups, so where do startups get their money from? And then running a startup, what do you need in the day-to-day? Well, it looks like I'm getting an echo of my voice.
Someone needs to mute.
Someone remote needs to mute, please.
Not us.
All right, thank you, whoever muted remotely. Okay. Types of startups. So broad division between hardware, software, consumer, and enterprise. Obviously, I'm generalizing a little. A lot of companies fall across these two dimensions. So consumer, most consumer startups have one of two funding models, one or two monetization models. One is that they don't have a monetization model at all. They are simply trying to get as many people using their products, and then they have an idea of what their product is worth based on the number of users, and can sell their company accordingly. So if you have a messaging app, there's no advertising on it, people aren't paying for that app, you're not even sure if they will, but you've got 100 million people using that app, then someone like Twitter or Facebook or Google knows what it means to get those 100 million users, and then your company is priced accordingly. The other most common way, other than getting people to pay for your consumer app, and no one likes to pay for consumer anything, is advertising. And so Jeff Hammerbacher, one of the best data scientists out of Facebook, came here really for Facebook, has lamented this. So he said, the best minds of my generation are thinking about how to make people click on ads. And this is behind a lot of technology that you'll see. So does anyone hazard a guess as to what percentage of revenue a company like Google gets from advertising?
95.
Yeah, around that, yeah. About 90-95%, yeah. It ducked under 90 recently, but that was simply because they acquired Motorola. So they had an actual hardware company for a while, which they quickly divested themselves of. It's not a completely insidious model in that, I would rather be advertised products that I'm interested in, and especially in the languages that I speak, something that we can help with. And in addition, I like having free search. I have good access to a lot of the world's knowledge via search engines. I like having interesting social networks. You're able to connect me with friends, especially those who are remote. And I like not having to pay for that personally. Of course, the value there is that they're selling my details on to the advertisers. So it's not completely insidious, but it does mean that I feel that consumer companies are less aligned with the changes that I would like to see in the world. So if I'm creating a consumer product, I'm really just trying to maximize how people are clicking on ads. Whereas if you're making an enterprise product, then you're building something that people actually want to buy. And hopefully you're able to get the value that they see in that product when they buy it. Obviously, I'm biased running an enterprise company, and this has been my background typically. So despite my love of consumer products, I feel if you are going to have an impact in the world, you're going to find better alignment between your product and that impact in an enterprise company. So what I'm talking about here, I guess, is what is a Silicon Valley startup? There are plenty of other kinds of startups that you can imagine. You could have a startup in the retail industry. You could have a startup in travel. Here, I'm specifically talking about tech startups and those who are either in Silicon Valley or follow what's now known as the Silicon Valley model. So this is typically a company where technology enables disruption. So there is something about a new or newly adapted technology which means that this company can completely disrupt a market. It might be cost. Something that was previously a manual function or involved a room full of servers can now be done much cheaper and much faster. So you're able to completely undercut what's already out there in the market. In addition, then potentially finding margins in applications where no one had previously. Another might be speed. So it's simply that you're making something a lot faster than what it used to be, enabling again turns around and different kinds of functionality than you could previously. So I think speed, a great example would be something like a self-driving car. Probably with room full of servers, you could already years ago have had a car that could drive itself, provided for every second you had hours and hours of processing time. Whereas you need that real-time processing in order to make it effective. The other is function. So if you're building something that no one has built before, something amazing, some incredible breakthrough technology that maybe few people even thought about, let alone realized that this is something that the world needed. This is the Hollywood version of disruption. It almost never occurs in actuality. So when you look at all the big companies today, they came to markets which were already flooded. So there are at least 20 search engines when Google launched. Most of you probably had a MySpace account before Facebook existed. Certainly Apple was fairly late to the PC market, and even the MP3 player market. But nonetheless, these have become the most successful companies in their domains. And Silicon Valley tech companies are also characterized by high risk, high reward. And this is tied to them being investor backed. So it's expected that the majority of tech startups won't be successful, but those that are successful have the potential to be very, very big. And so then this ties into investment, so how startups are funded. And so I guess one thing I don't have in the slides here itself is one thing you need to do as a startup is be sure that either you're in a market or you're going to create a market which is going to make you $1 billion company one day. So you can completely disrupt something in terms of cost, speed, function, but if you're addressing a market which is only, say, 50 million or 100 million in size, then the value of your company is never going to get to that level of return that an investor is going to be interested in. So the other thing you need is, I guess, the fourth dimension here is scale as well. Your market needs to be large enough. So why take venture capital? The broad reason is that it allows you to concentrate on building out your company before you need to make a profit. So by way of reference, perhaps about 90% of the money in Idibon right now has come from investment. So 90% of your salary is from investors who believe in Idibon's product, believes in our vision, and wants to put that money in to ensure that we can build it with a much larger team than we otherwise could. This also allows some flexibility. You can try out a number of things in terms of R&D. You can take a few months to spin something out rather than spinning something out within a couple of weeks because it's just the next thing that your immediate client wants. It also means that you can hire people with the needed skills. So even if you had a good team of people, you might all of a sudden see one day that you need an interface developer like you didn't before, or someone who knows how to integrate with Salesforce or SAP. And so, sorry, I'm very popular. And so it gives you the capital to bring in those resources with expertise that you might not have in an otherwise small team. And finally, investors have connections and their own expertise. A lot of investors have themselves run and taken companies through exits and IPOs before, They're extremely well connected, which means they can make intros for things like sales, they can help with recruiting, and you also get some name recognition as well if you're partnered with big investors. So even when we were a small company, having CoStar as an early investor opened a lot of doors for us. So what is venture capital? So what does this mean when someone is invested in your company? So there are a few models for this, but most of them come down to two, and really mainly this first one. So investors give you money for an agreed percent of your company. This is determined by price, or the value of your company. So it's known as a priced round. So let's say that your company is valued at $10 million, and an investor puts in $2 million. What that means is that the investor gets the percent of the company relative to that value. You'll hear about pre and post money valuations. So in this case, if your company is valued at 10 million and someone invests 2 million, then your post money valuation is the 12 million, 10 plus the 2. Because your company was seen to be valued at 10 million and then you had an injection of 2 million in cash. And so the percent that the investor gets is actually on that post money valuation. So if you're valued at 10 and they put in 2, it's actually 2 over 12, not 2 over 11 in terms of the percent of the company they get. That's about the only thing that falls in favor of the startup during investment. Typically you'll have different classes of stock. So investors get what's known as preferred stock, meaning that in the event of the sale of the company, if it's below the value at which they invested, then they get paid out in full first before the common stockholders. There might be other provisions as well, but that's typically the most common. You might also see provisions where the preferred stock is worth more per share than common stock. That's fairly rare. It's not something that we have at Idibon, and I don't know that many companies who have something similar. So that's basically it. You would give investors a share of your company, and they're paying for that perceived value in the company. The other way it can happen, and this is something that might happen especially early on, is what's known as a convertible note. So you're a very early company, you really just got an idea, someone believes in you, and they say, okay, I'm going to give you, $100,000 or $500,000. You make it happen. Don't worry about what your company is worth right now with this relatively small amount of money. When you have a priced round later, we'll convert at that amount. So that 500,000, you don't know what that's worth in terms of percent of the company, but when that company later has a priced round, say at 5 million, then you know that, okay, that 500,000 is going to come out to like roughly 10%. More or less, you might have some conditions around that, like interest or a cap on what that later percent can be. But the idea is that this is a faster way for someone to put money in your company and not worry about doing the full due diligence, which will give you the value of your company at that time. So venture capitalists, who are they? It's really varied. A lot of them will have a business background, a lot of them will have a tech background. Something they'll all have in common is their interest in technology. So if you look at 90% of the venture funds out there, they're just performing as well or not as well as the Dow Jones Index, meaning that these same investors could be taking their money, just randomly invested on the stock exchange, or get someone to do something a bit smarter for them, and sitting on an island somewhere, not being involved in the community at all. So if someone is involved in venture capital for tech companies, it means that they do have a genuine interest in the technology itself. They believe in the disruptive power of the startup community. It also means, of course, that they are making investments in technology that they know is more likely to fail. So high risk, high reward, like I said. So they'll diversify their investments. They'll invest across 100 companies, knowing that maybe only 10 of them will be very successful in their return. Half of them will break even. And if they're lucky, 1 or 2 will go on to become the companies worth tens of billions of dollars. Okay, so types of investors. Venture capitalists are the ones you hear about the most, but you'll also hear some other names thrown around very frequently. So angels get their name by being very early investors. Often when your company is no more than an idea, these are people who believe in your company, or just as often believe in you as an individual, as an entrepreneur, and want to put money into your company. This is typically when companies are valued at, say, 5 million or much less. And this will often be as a convertible note. Venture capitalists are early to late stage investors. So when you take an investment in your company valued anywhere between, say, 5 million and 5 billion, you might get, that's when you get venture capitalists involved. Different VC firms will have different ranges of valuations they're interested in. So some won't be interested until you're around about the 30 or $40 million mark. And certainly not all will invest in companies up to the $5 billion mark. Because to get a good return on your investment at $5 billion, that company needs to become a $50 billion company. There's not that many $50 billion companies out there. Private equity, you don't hear that much about private equity firms in tech investment because they're typically very late investors, not really looking at anything less than $1 billion companies, and they don't typically invest in tech, or not particularly in tech in the way that VCs do. So they'll often invest in very established companies that are currently undervalued. So if you remember all the 80s films where you've got these horrible people going in, finding undervalued companies, winning their trust, then breaking the companies apart and selling them, that may well have been people involved in private equity. In reality, it's not like Hollywood. Mostly it's people who have domain expertise and knowledge in the industries in which they're acquiring these companies. But unlike venture capitalists or angels, they're not necessarily looking for that 1,000x or 100x return. Often you're getting a 2 or 3x return if you're lucky on a private equity investment. It just happens to be that 2 or 3x is billions of dollars. So different kinds of calculations come into play there. You might hear the name strategic investor thrown around as well. Typically, strategic investor is a type of VC, venture capitalist. Strategic investor normally means that money comes from a large company. So for Idibon, Samsung is an example of a strategic investor. So they're not typically in the game of investing alone. They have their own business. It's usually a tech business, and they're interested in keeping their eye on new emerging technologies which are out there, and making investments allows them to be connected to these technologies and get conditions like right of first refusal. So within a certain period of time of their investment, if another company offers to acquire the one they invested in, they have the option to acquire the company or make a counteroffer. One way that strategic investors will differ from VCs is that because they're doing this due to their interest in technology, they don't necessarily need that return on investment in a short amount of time. So they don't necessarily need that 100x return on investment within 5 years. If you have no investors, that's called bootstrapping here in the Bay. Okay, so you've probably heard about funding rounds as well. So what does it mean to be Series A, B, C, seed, etc.? These steps have been fairly stable, although as I was saying a bit, they're changing a little bit now. But for an enterprise tech startup, these are what the rounds look like. So pre-funding, you have an idea for what your company should look like, and maybe a prototype. If you're very advanced and you've already got people using your prototypes, you've got actual customers, which we did. Seed stage, you build your minimum viable product, find product market fit, and people use your product. So this is when you're first getting your product out there based on your seed stage investment, maybe anywhere in the range of typically say $500,000 to a couple of $1 million. This is what enables you to get your first product out there that people are using. Series A, having demonstrated that people actually want to use your product in the market that you've identified, you take Series A funding. This can be anywhere in the range of really like 2 to 20 million at the moment. More typical is somewhere around 5. So this is the funding and stage where you show traction in your market. So you've got your MVP out there, you've got some early market clients. Series A is when you can show here are multiple people who are using my product. I have a repeatable sales process where I can deliver this same product to multiple people and they all want to purchase it. Series B and beyond is growth rounds. So this is when you've established your product market fit, you've found a lot of people want to purchase your product, and you're aggressively trying to get your product out there to as many people as possible, scaling your revenue. The number of rounds you take will just be determined by how often you need to take investment in order to grow as quickly as possible, typically with a goal towards whatever your exit is. Even if you are in the black in terms of revenue, it might still be in your interest to take investment. So let's say you're making a profit of $1 million a year, but you've got this incredible customer base. Your company is valued at $100 million a year, valued at $100 million. That it really makes sense, rather than trying to grow based on that $1 million, that you'll take extra investment based on that $100 million valuation. Say 10 million, 20 million, give away a relatively small percent of your company, then put that 10 to 20 million on rapidly expanding your ability to grow, your ability to build out more products and tackle more markets, or add more features to your existing product. And there's a nice correlation here. When you don't need investment, it's when you're most likely to get it. So if you are in the black, you don't need investors to come in, then you're in the driver's seat because you're showing that you're successful. And that's where you can get the much better valuations. On that note as well, there's a saying that when you talk to investors, if you're asking for investment, all you'll get is advice. But if you ask for advice, you'll get offers for investment. So certainly, even though it's not a good growth model to be in the black and comfortably turn in a profit, you want to be able to show that you can do that in order to be in a good negotiating position. The caveat in all this is that the seed, Series A, Series B stages might all be shifting. So it used to be that no one would have a prototype before getting their seed investment. Now it's becoming more common. It used to be that people might just have a little bit of traction in their seed stage. Now they're expected to have a lot, maybe around $1 million in recurring revenue. And as a result, the valuations of all these stages are changing rapidly. So I'm not sure if you can see this graph at the back. This is, the red line here is the median Series A pre-money valuations over the last few years. And the blue line up here is the 2004 Series B valuation. So Series A, for a very long time up until the last couple of years ago, kind of fluctuated up and down between 5 and 10 million as a typical company valuation for a Series A. And now it's really just in the last year jumped to 19 million. Obviously, we're part of that by being at 25, so being even higher still. But just 10 years ago, the next round, Series B valuations were really sitting like below 20 million as well. So it may be that it's just the funding rounds have all taken a shift to the right. It also may be an aberration based on the amount of capital which is in the market right now, and this will change back. No one's really sure. A lot of people think they're sure, actually, but lots of people are very sure and now they disagree with each other. There's no consensus. All right, so the third part, running a startup. So understanding these rounds of funding and what it means in terms of your steps as a company is very important. So just one example of this is your first clients are reference clients, later ones are for growth. So your early clients should be the ones that position you best for growth in a particular market. Either they're marquee clients, everyone recognizes that they are, they're the Cadillac of a given industry, and if you've landed them, then everyone else wants to work with you. Or they're ones that you can very easily talk about. So when we were first looking for clients at Idibon, one of the criteria among many was that it was use cases that we could explain to anyone in any industry. Meaning that no matter what we're tackling later, we could talk about the successes we've had, and people would say, oh, I get that. So that's why when we decided to go after consumer manufacturing broadly, for consumer electronics, we went after Samsung, so the biggest company in consumer electronics, because if you can talk about how you can pull out information about brands and products and sentiment across languages for Samsung, anybody's going to get that. And you don't have to be in the consumer electronics industry to understand this use case because you have a phone. You understand why people would complain about the battery life or the screen size of that phone. So the same is true for another early client in Edmunds.com. They're in the auto industry. Everyone understands the use case of cars having different features and extracting that information. So even though we're not necessarily going to be tackling the auto industry or the consumer electronics industries as our main industries, in fact, we knew back then we probably wouldn't, we saw these as stepping stone verticals. So understanding that in the time we had as a seed stage company, these were clients that we could land. They had a shorter sales cycle, and there were companies that would be useful further down the track. So understanding this as a startup rather than going for that end client is hugely important. The other, which I think is very important, is maintaining vision. Something I've seen a lot in companies that failed because of internal problems was that people didn't know where they were going. So this is very reasonable. Product, go-to-market strategy, these will all evolve, these will all change as you explore different parts of the market, as you bring in team members with different skills, different connections, different expertise. So it's inevitable that exactly how you are taking your product to market will change, and most likely the product itself, but your vision shouldn't. So for us, our vision is bringing intelligent language technology to all the world's languages. That's still the company goal, and that doesn't change. Whether we're working with early clients in consumer electronics in the auto industry, whether we're working with a lot of financial clients like we are right now, that's still the end goal for the company, and that's something that we can have a shared belief in, not even just as an end goal, also in informing the kinds of clients we want to work with right now. The right way to think about your code is to plan for it to last 1 year. Oh, a trivia. Can anybody tell me who this is in the photograph?
Didn't she code like all the code for the Challenger or something?
Close. Yeah.
Something
The
is it
one of the
Yeah, you're all there, like collectively. So Margaret Hamilton was one of the main software engineers for NASA for the Apollo missions. In fact, she coined the term software engineering. So this photograph is, it's reportedly the code that she used for an Apollo mission, printed out. I think it's actually apocryphal. I think this photograph is from some other simulation that she ran and become associated with the Apollo missions. Anyway, unlike Margaret Hamilton, your code is not sending astronauts into outer space. Given the rate of growth of a startup, 1 year sounds about right. So for, you don't know how big the company's going to be in 1 year. The profile of usage of that code is going to be very different. So you could very easily over-optimize for a usage pattern which is current when you don't really know what it's going to look like in a year's time. Also, even though you are recoding in a year, you're going to have more resources then. So your company is growing 2x, 5x, 10x. So actually the opportunity cost of recoding that is a much smaller percentage of engineering time. So by putting a lot of that time off later, you're actually being more efficient in terms of the company's percent of engineering resources than if you make something very polished to begin with. Finally, even for the bits of code which it turns out you do need more than a year, they will last longer, and then somebody does need to go back and recode them. Because you've grown as a team, chances are you no longer own that piece of code. Someone else comes in, they're owning that part of the code base, and they might have wanted to recode that for themselves anyway. They get better ownership that way, so it's not a loss. Along similar lines, you shouldn't be recoding anything for linear time gains. So if you want to go from order N to order 1, that's great, you're making something much more efficient. But unless it's linear time games in terms of real-time user interaction, there's really no need to go back and shave a few seconds or even a few minutes off batch processing. you're better off applying your skills, your time, your expertise elsewhere. And then when somebody does come back, in about that year to recode that, that's when you get that speed up. And you're getting that speed up according to what you actually need at that year later time. Okay, sales. So especially for a small startup, your first customers are really important. So these are your reference clients, your marquee clients. So something that we actually did here when I first brought on external salespeople was have a different quota system for any client that we agreed was a market client in advance. I think our criteria was Fortune 500 or anyone was mutually agreed that they were an industry leader. Because these kinds of clients are going to be much more important as you grow. So I believe the adage in enterprise sales that you are determined by the quality of your first clients. So if you're selling to the best client in a market, people associate you with being the best product. If you're only selling to mom and pop shops, then people associate you with being the less quality product. Use all available resources. So if you're in sales, you need to get used to grabbing people from engineering or data science, or the CEO and sitting him down on a sales call. Unlike in a larger company where I see a lot of people smiling because I've done that to me a lot. Unlike a large company, so if you're at SAP or the Oracles of the world, you're going to have all these materials ready to go. People are going to be familiar with your brand. Chances are they're already using your product and you're just upselling them. You don't have all those materials at a startup. You're often making them on a per client basis or continually updating this. So you need to be smart about the kinds of materials that you can very quickly create, the kinds of resources that you can bring to an individual sale. And finally, you should be selling the company, not just the product. So when someone is working with a startup, they're taking a risk in themselves. So they could go for an established vendor, they could go for a company that's been around for 2 years, and like most startups might not be around in 3 or 4 more years' time. And so part of the reason they're taking this risk is because they view your product as being much more innovative, and they know that's because of the people that you have. You've got people who can move fast, they're at the top of their field, they can create the next generation of their product to suit you as the clients need. So you are definitely selling the company based on the expertise of the founders, the expertise of the engineers, the cutting edge knowledge that the data scientists have. And this is actually something that came up just last night when I was meeting with the person leading one of our partnerships, one of the big consulting firms, and she said just outright, it's a pleasure working with your team. This has been one of the big deciding factors for us. Okay, data science. No one really knows what data science is yet. It's really recent. It's very tied to startups in general. So it's actually a little bit difficult for me to say what it means to be a data scientist in a startup relative to what it means in a larger company. I guess the biggest difference, which I don't necessarily have here, is you're more likely to be client-facing because everyone's more likely to be client-facing. As a data scientist, you have the ability to turn around materials and analysis much faster than anybody else can. In a way, your analysis can be a form of prototyping, which will then inform how engineering are later building out their products. Which is why data scientists are kind of viewed as the magicians of the tech world right now. But obviously turnaround is vital. So if you are helping with something that's client-facing, getting insights back to a client as quickly as possible is really vital. And as with engineering, this doesn't need to be a PhD worthy form of data science. Often clients will have no insights into their data and there are some low-hanging fruit. And you might be magicians, and you might need this quick turnaround, and you might even find out at the last minute that the data is in some weird format that no one's really sure about. So the adage is that data scientists are viewed as magicians, but really they're data janitors. Because you spend most of your time getting data. And we thank you for that. Okay, so that's it. And I was going to talk about what it means to run a startup as a CEO. It was hard for me to think of any generalizations about what it means because it's so specific on your company, that the people that you're working with, your product, and your market. So I decided instead I'm just going to share you what a day in my life looks like. So this was my day today. So my day started at 2 a.m. Pacific time in Chicago when I was on a call with JR, with our director of engineering, going over, who was in Berlin, he wasn't up at 2 a.m. From 2 to 4 a.m. I was commuting to the airport in Chicago. At that time, I was reviewing 2 different NLP papers, one for a conference, one actually for a journal, which a great way to maintain our connections with what's cutting edge in technology, and also making sure that we're helping out the academic community who are the editors for these journals. Also, these were way overdue. There were sending me reminders about these, and so sitting in a commute in a lounge is a good way to do it. I got 4 hours of sleep, which is good for me, on the plane. It was one of those times when the plane was almost completely full, but I had a seat next to me vacant. It was nice. I ate and showered this morning, so I was able to make time for that. Caught up on correspondence overnight. Actually, this is one generalization that I will make. It's super important that you're not distracted thinking about the people you need to get back to when you're interacting, especially with your team during the day. So I always make an effort to get up as early as I need to and spend the first 20 minutes to 2 hours of my day responding to any outstanding emails and correspondence with people externally. 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. I created the deck that you're looking at right now. I hope it's okay. I got some of those support materials. Actually, I did some of that and just sleep on the plane as well. I got that first version of the deck out and ran that analysis of TechCrunch. And I absolutely spent the first half hour you were eating lunch here finishing this deck. I hope it's polished enough. Then I gave this presentation. That's what I'm doing right now. The rest of the afternoon, I'm following up with the people I met over the last couple of days in Chicago, both with them with outstanding issues and sharing with sales here about how those deals are progressing. I'm on a client call from 2 to 3. I'm free from 3 to 4. I should have put this on there. It's too many eyes later. From 4 to 5, I'm reviewing IP documents. So the lawyers that we're employing for patents have put together what I hope is going to be a really nice overview of our patents. At 5, I'm collecting a tux, and then from 5:30 to 9:30 this evening, black tie event for EY's Entrepreneur of the Year. And I guess this is on the longer side for a day, but it's not completely atypical for me. And I guess the other generalization is that you do need to be able to do something like go to a black tie event, into your 20th hour of the day, and still be engaged and be prepared to go around and, in this case, meet the specific targets that we want to hit as potential partners or clients later on. That's not actually the end of my night either. I'm going out for a social event afterwards. Equally important, maintaining a life independent of your day job. My best friends here in Silicon Valley know nothing about the tech industry, and that's actually really important for me. Back to where we were. Starting the company is like throwing yourself off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. The most important part of falling off a cliff and spending 20 hours a day doing it is deciding who you want to jump off the cliff with. Certainly you want to spend your day with people who you really enjoy, people that you respect, people that you can learn from. This ultimately creates better products as well, and investors know this too. Right through to the later rounds of the company even, they are looking at the quality of the staff that you're able to attract because they know that's going to create better products and because they trust people's instincts. So if you have a lot of top engineers, data scientists, salespeople, marketing people, you name it, wanting to come be part of your company, then investors realize that these are people who could go anywhere. They have their pulse on what's interesting and what's important. And this signals a lot that people like this want to come together. And also, of course, like I said, investors believe in the power of tech. They believe in the industry, and so they genuinely enjoy helping to create companies where some of the best people can come together and create awesome solutions. All right, thank you.
I'm curious about valuation with all the talk about the bubble in like the past year. Like, what are some criteria by which a company like Idibon is valued like during a Series A round?
What bubble? There's no bubble.
This one.
Yeah, it's different. So I guess basically you've got two kinds of valuation: pre-revenue and post-revenue. Pre-revenue, it's all about the size of the market and the potential for the team to deliver in that market. So it's almost like the product itself doesn't come into it. And the investors believe that if you have the right engineers, you've analyzed the market, you have the people already know how to build things that can beat there, and the market ready for disruption, then that'll be the main factor. Related to that, the right people can also be people who've been in startups before or had exits before, etc. So they've had that track record of success, or even failure. So failure is valued almost as much as success. You've learned your lesson about what didn't work. Post revenue, it becomes more about the numbers of what your current revenue. They'll have an idea about what multiple of, in particular, annual recurring revenue, what multiple of that will be your valuation. Also coming into that is the quality of the people you're partnering with. So, if you are partnering with big consulting firms like we are, you have Fortune 500 as your clients, they know that signals strength, that you have good clients who understand your technology. So that'll help too. And like I said, team's always important. It is somewhat of a black magic though, working out the right valuation. And then as a CEO, what you want to do, or whoever is negotiate with investors, is make sure that there's competition. So right now, there's more money looking to be invested in Silicon Valley than there are good companies out there, especially later stage companies. So what that means is that you can get investors competing with each other and pushing up the valuation that way. That wasn't the case for us though. They got exactly the right valuation. You know what? They got a good valuation.
So my question is more to do with your path to Idibon. So you came from an academic background, and I'm curious as to whether you think that's a transition that we need to see more, and need to see more interplay between academia and tech innovation. And I ask because I know at least at Berkeley there's a lot of talk about how there's a disconnect there that really some people think it needs to be bridged, and others say it's lost cause and academics won't commercialize their work.
Yeah, I mean, so my experience has actually been mixed. So I spent a lot of time in industry before going back to academia, and I helped launch a couple of companies as a CTO during my time at Stanford. So I'm a little atypical in terms of coming from academia. Yeah, I don't actually see the disconnect as a bad thing. There's all kinds of incredible research coming out of academic institutions, and that's what they're there for. They're not meant to be making the thing which is going to be sold within like a year or two. And you'll find a lot of that innovation will come out of universities in ways that you didn't expect. So certainly Google came out of Stanford. The PageRank algorithm is still owned by Stanford and then licensed by Google because of that. Because they had the freedom to commandeer an unusual number of servers and spend a couple of years working on something for which no one at that time recognized economic value. Ditto Facebook. So they took what was basically kind of an internal profile and sharing system in universities that someone saw no value in, and actually create something that people started using. So I'm not sure that I would hate to see universities, especially computer science departments, focusing only on the immediate needs of industry. As for more people in academia joining companies, you see that a lot. And one thing I've seen a lot when investors have been asking for everything they want, like number of clients, revenue, etc., everything about your company. Number of PhDs is commonly one of the fields there. So it's generally recognized that having expertise in the field has value. I'm sure masters and bachelors have value. Too. That's what you guys have had.
So let's say we have a MVP, a minimum viable product. How do we get angel investors to invest in that idea? So how do we actually promote?
How do you find the investors?
How do you find it?
Oh yeah. Warm intros, or hot intros, I guess. It's really hard to cold call investors and get their attention because everybody is doing that. So at least to get that initial meeting, you want an introduction from someone who knows those investors. So if it's angels, typically it's someone that you know already. So angel investors, small angel investors are all people in NLP space. So people that I've worked with previously, or friends of theirs who have worked in places like Yahoo Search. So that's how they came about. So the combination of having that existing connection and then being particularly interested in this industry. Koestler came through, actually a couple of introductions at the same time. So a few people in his organization. One wanted me to approach them for funding, the other was trying to recruit me to be a CTO of one of their companies. And so that's how those interests came about. But yeah, if you have investors that you want to speak to, then the best thing to do is to go onto LinkedIn, see who your mutual contacts are, and have them make that intro for you.
How did you know, like pre-seed, that you had an idea that was the right idea to pursue? Kind of a hard.
Yeah. That's a good question. I never doubted it. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. So, let's shoot. So, I mean, I definitely knew the demand was there, right? That more and more of the world is coming online. A tiny percentage of the world are English speakers, and the technology simply wasn't there for the majority of the world's languages. So that's something I knew from like working in West Africa or global epidemic tracking, and it was the topic of my PhD. So I knew the literature, and I knew it barely existed outside of English. Then the other thing I also needed to prove in order to see whether this could be a VC-backed startup is looking at the market size. So I need to be able to justify, well, okay, here's the size of the potential addressable market. Here are the current players. Here's why they're not cutting edge like they should be, because they don't have machine learning back in their processes. They haven't figured out the importance of human in the loop. Here's the value of sentiment analysis at different levels of accuracy. Human in the loop gives you like 2 orders of magnitude better return. No one's addressing this in a smart way. Talking about that, this can be the billion-dollar company, or the multi-billion-dollar company. And then pointing to examples as well. So it is really rare that you do get the first company in a vertical to be the big successful one. So pointing to companies like Autonomy, have got a lot of similar technology to us, had been acquired by HP for 11 billion and then imploded internally. So that was actually, and still is, a nice market condition for us. Because Autonomy were poised to really take over a lot of the language technology industry. And they're doing really nothing innovative now. They're not able to recruit good people. I think they were written off for 8 billion by HP. So that shows that there's a vacuum in the market that's ready to be disrupted.
Yeah.
Thank you. It worked, right?
Yeah.
Try to stay ahead of the competition. New companies that come up with.
Yeah, I mean, through a network of private detectives, corporate espionage, right? It's still rolling.